Good morning everyone, my name's Molly and I'm a Community Engagement Officer at Earthwatch Europe, and today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about the changing of the seasons and some small activities that you can do to get your nature space ready or make the most of the colder weather and the end of the summer. So what I'm going to start with is talking a little bit about planting. Like the majority of the people across the UK, my lockdown hobby has been to plant. So I've been lucky enough to have a bit of space in my garden that I've been able to plant tomatoes in and cucumbers in, and it's been a hobby that I've really enjoyed but that I thought would come to an end now that the weather was getting colder. But there is a lot of different things that you can carry on planting through autumn and into winter, such as herbs, which can go great on a sunny windowsill, or there's vegetables that are really great and quite hardy for over the winter, which are really great if you want to plant things outside still. But other things that you can plant are bulbs. So this time of year is a really great time to start thinking about the flowers that you might want to have in your garden or in your nature space through the spring. And so planting bulbs is a really great thing that you can do over the winter to get your garden ready for when the sunshine reappears. Now, one thing that I find is really important, particularly when you're planting things like bulbs that might not show signs of flowering until the spring, is that you have to make sure that you label them all correctly so that you can remember what they are. So a couple of ways that I like to label my plants are, you can buy the typical sort of little plastic stakes, and I've just labelled them here with salad leaves. So that's something that I'm probably going to plant on my windowsill because they grow really quickly and are nice things of produce that you can continue to use over the winter. Or one thing that you can use if you'd rather not use the plastic sticks, or you'd rather not go out and buy new things, so if you've got any lollipop sticks lying around, you can just write on them what you're planting, just like this, and then just coat them with a layer of clear nail polish or PVA glue, and they weather really well if you're planting things outside. And once you're done, you can either paint over them and reuse them for something else, whether it be crafts or if you just want to plant something different. And otherwise they last for years and years and you can just keep reusing them. Now, one thing that I really like to do when I'm planting bulbs particularly is to paint what I'm planting on pebbles. Just like this one that I've planted here, you can see that that one says daffodils. Now, you don't have to do pictures if you don't want to, you can simply just paint the label and write on there what it is that you've planted. But I find that they last really well throughout the winter, especially when you're planting in bedding. And the nice thing about this is that you can put these down onto soil or onto bark, and the underside gets nice and dark and damp, and lots of little insects that are lasting within your soil will like to live underneath there. So it sort of has that added bonus that you're doing a bit of good for nature at the same time as making sure you remember what you've planted. Now, the important thing to remember is that if you're using wooden sticks or if you're using the pebbles, just give them a good coat of either PVA glue or that clear nail polish, and they'll last really, really well outside, and then the labels won't go in the weather either. So that's one thing that I'm really looking forward to over the coming weeks, is making sure that I can keep up that hobby of planting different things. And they have the really nice bonus, particularly bulbs that are going to flower in the spring, have the nice bonus that they do help wildlife as well. So they don't just look pretty, they have a really great benefit for things like bees and butterflies and other pollinating insects. So it's really nice to keep up that habit of planting even through the winter. And this is a great way of making sure that you keep track of what you've done. Now, another thing that I really like to do is less of an action to get your garden ready for winter, but more of just a bit of an experiment that can help you to make the most of the dull weather. So I'm quite lucky to be in sunny Highworth today, which is in Swindon, and although it's cold, the sun is shining. But one thing I've noticed about the autumn is that the rain has started to come again. And one thing I like to do, just as a bit of an experiment, and is something that kids and families really love doing together, is to make a rain gauge. And what you can do with this is you can catch rain and keep track of how much rain you get over the space of a week or a month. And it's a nice little experiment that can sort of show you what's happening with the weather and what sort of things are going on in your garden. So to do this, what you'll need is a 2-litre plastic bottle, just like this one. You want to make sure that it's clean so that there's no sort of leftover drink in it. And then all you want to do is just cut the bottom of it off just like this. So if you're doing this with little ones, make sure that you give them a hand when they're using scissors or a knife to cut this. But otherwise you just want to take off just sort of the bottom portion of that bottle. Now, some people prefer to take off the top portion and they can then stand it up on a patio. But I prefer to take off this bottom portion because what you can do with it afterwards is turn it into a little planter like I've done here. So I've got a small little off-cutting of one of my house plants, as you can see there. And all I've done is just put some potting soil into this and put some drainage holes into the bottom, and then you can just plant a little off-cutting in here as well. But as I said, if you're putting your rain gauge on some patio or outdoors, not digging it into the ground, then you might want to cut this top end off instead. But what you want to do is once you've got this section of your rain gauge, you want to grab a ruler, just any old ruler will do, or a tape measure if you've got a tape measure, and you're going to use a marker pen to make intervals along this side here, along the long side. And you want to mark off roughly at about every centimetre or half centimetre, just so that there's clear measurements that you can use to measure how much rain you've got. So there's one that I've done before just here, and you can see that all along there's centimetre markings so that you can measure how much rain you've collected. Now once you've done this and once it's ready, you want to go out into your garden and dig a small hole just so that you can prop the bottle upright and make sure that it keeps staying upwards. A small hole will do usually, but if you want to just pile a little bit of extra soil around just to make sure that it's sturdy, or use a couple of rocks or maybe logs, then that all helps to just prop these up. And then what we like to do is go out every sort of day or every other day and just keep track of how much rain is gathering in this rain gauge, and then at the end of the week you can empty it out, or if you want to keep track of each day you can empty it out after every day. And it's nice to record these and then see how much rain you get changes over the seasons. So you might notice that as it gets colder we get less rain but we get more frost, and then going into the spring or the April showers it might change again. So it's a really good way to keep track of the weather throughout the year. And a really fun thing that you can do as well is that organisations such as the Met Office allow you to access historical weather records. So you can compare the weather data that you gather using your rain gauge to weather data that has been collected over the years for your area. Now, another great benefit of this little experiment, other than being able to track the weather and keep track of what's going on outdoors, is that you can use the water that you've gathered to water your plants. So that saves you having to use additional water or having to use a hose to water all your lovely winter plants, and it acts as like a mini water butt that you can use to also help out your garden. So it's a really fun experiment to do, particularly if you have kids, and it teaches them a lot about weather and the climate. And it's a really fun activity to do, particularly as we're going into the rainy season and the weather is changing. So it's a lot of fun, and it can be really useful for learning more about the environment and learning more about weather as a whole. So finally, one thing that I do love to do, particularly as we are going into winter, is to help out the feathered friends. So I love having things out on my bird table that I can have a look at and watch all of the birds coming to the table. But for a lot of people, it's much more convenient to have things that maybe hang from trees or that you can put out onto a platform, just in case you don't have a bird table or you don't have sort of plastic bird feeders. We've got a really great thing that you can use, which is pine cones. So just a simple pine cone is a really great tool for how to help your birds over winter. So we know that over winter things start to slow down a bit, there's less plants, which ultimately means that there's less insects as well, and birds can really struggle to find food during that time. So making bird feeders is a really great way to support wildlife in your nature space, and this literally could not be simpler to do. So what you're going to want to do is get a block of lard, just a small block of lard is completely fine, and then you want to get a chunk of lard I'm using a bit that's just about this big and just adding it to a bowl, just like that. And then you want to get some birdseed. So I've got a cup of birdseed here. And it can be any birdseed really. Some birds are a bit fussy and they only like specific kinds, but I just get whatever kind of birdseed I can get hold of, either in a place like Wilkinson's or a discount store or a pet store, and just use that one. And what we're going to do is add some birdseed into the bowl. Now, there isn't a perfect art to doing this. You don't have to be specific with the measurements that you use. You just want to get the right sort of ratio so that your mixture's still quite sticky, but there is a lot of birdseed in there. And the reason for that is that this mixture, I made one before, which you can see there. So it's sort of like a Play-Doh-y texture of mixture. And what you're going to do with that is you're going to stuff it into the pine cone. So you want to make sure that it's just thick enough that it will still stick to the gaps in the pine cone, but it's not all lard and that there's plenty of birdseed in there. So once you've got your lard and your birdseed in a bowl, you just want to mix it up. You can either do this with a fork or you can do it with your hands. Just as a word of warning, if you're going to do it with your hands, that's more than okay, but you want to give them a good wash beforehand to make sure that there's nothing on there that's going to get into the bird food, and you want to give them a good wash afterwards because lard is very, very sticky and it gets everywhere if you don't wash your hands properly. So once you've got your mixture, as I say, this is one that I've just made here, you're going to grab your pine cone and all you're going to do is just stuff and squeeze this mixture into the pine cone, just like that. Now it's quite therapeutic to do if you can get over the stickiness, and if the stickiness isn't something that you're that bothered about, then you can just stuff it in with your hands. But again, if you prefer not to get it all over your hands, you can either use a spoon or put a pair of gloves on and just do it that way. Now you can see that the texture is pretty good because it's sticking into the pine cones quite nicely, but there is also a lot of birdseed in there, which is going to be great for the birds. And the lard acts as a great source of energy as well. It's obviously just pure fat, but over the winter the birds do quite struggle to find food, so a little bit of fat won't do them any harm. And the perfect thing about this is that they can go anywhere. So if you've got a little tree or sort of a little sapling or a bush in your garden, you can balance these within some of the twigs so that they don't fall. Or if you wanted to, you can attach a small piece of string to the top and then hang it from something, whether that be a twig or from your windowsill. And birds love these. They're best to do over winter because it means that the lard won't melt in the heat. And also it's just a really great source of food for them, and just tides them over until the spring when the flowers come out and there's more insects around and their food sources are more readily available. So that's nice and stuffed in there. So all I'm going to do with that is just pop it out into my garden, and make sure that it's somewhere where the birds will first thing see it and second be able to access it. I'm probably going to put it in a tree because there's a lot of birds there and it's pretty sturdy as well. But otherwise it's as simple as that really, and it's a really great food source for birds to use, and for them to be able to have over the winter, just to help them out a bit. So those are my top tips for getting ready for the winter and making the most of the autumn months. I hope you've enjoyed watching the video, and if you give any of these activities a go, please do feel free to either post them on one of our social media channels or share them with us. We'd really love to see how you've got on with them and if you've given them a go. And yeah, it's been fun to talk to you today and to do the Facebook Live with you, and I hope you've all enjoyed it. In the meantime, give us a like or a follow, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you very much.